Creating a trauma-sensitive school, a transition plan overview. Before we look at how we will change, it is important to understand why. Well, there are a plethora of reasons. I have narrowed it down to three big ones that caught my attention and hopefully will catch yours too. First, trauma is much more prevalent than most of us realize. Research continues to reveal that approximately 50 to 65% of our nation's children experience one or more traumatic experience before reaching adulthood. At schools with higher populations living in poverty or struggling with trauma related to systematic racism or persecution, trauma is even more prevalent. Second, trauma significantly impacts all areas of the developing brain. This video explains in more detail how trauma and toxic stress impact brain development and learning. Third, and possibly most important, we can do something to support these students despite the trauma they have or are experiencing. Research continues to indicate that caring relationships with supportive adults that make students feel safe and provide opportunities for them to learn and practice adaptive strategies support resilience in spite of adversity. While we can do little about the trauma students experience outside of school, we can provide supportive relationships, positive experiences, and learning opportunities that foster adaptive coping skills. Creating a trauma-informed culture requires a shift from everyone, not just a few. The remainder of this presentation will lay out a plan for specific changes using the flexible framework, which identifies 6 elements of school operations that must be addressed in creating a trauma-sensitive school. The Trauma and Learning Institute has identified these areas of school operations as essential to creating trauma-sensitive schools. A strong leadership team, professional development, collaboration with families, increasing access to resources, and implementing trauma-sensitive policies, protocols, and strategies are included in our plan for creating a trauma-sensitive school. Leadership plays a key role in affecting any school-wide change. We will assemble a strong team made up of school personnel and community members to lead us in transitioning into a truly trauma-sensitive school. An administrator will create a plan for rolling out school-wide changes, will lead, organize, and guide teamwork, work with individual teachers to address concerns and problem-solve perceived obstacles to trauma-sensitive practices, as well as monitor progress. The social worker and psychologist will work together to provide research related to best practices and organize and provide ongoing trauma-related professional development for staff. Grade level representatives will role model trauma-sensitive practices and mentor grade level teams in problem-solving challenges, shifting mindset, and implementing trauma-sensitive practices, as well as provide feedback related to readiness and challenges from team perspective. The behavior interventionist will support individual teachers with specific behavior challenges in and out of the classroom by helping them to put trauma-sensitive practices in place. A special education leader will role model trauma-sensitive practices and mentor staff support staff in problem-solving challenges, shifting mindset, and implementing trauma-sensitive practices, as well as providing feedback related to readiness and challenges from a team perspective. A parent representative will be responsible for participating in PTO meetings and events where families and school staff will share concerns and goals, provide family feedback from meetings and events, and share information about trauma-sensitive practices with families. A custodial representative will be responsible for role modeling trauma-sensitive practices and mentoring support staff in problem-solving challenges, mind shift changes, and implementing trauma-sensitive practices in the hallways. A bus driver representative will role model trauma-sensitive practices and mentor other bus drivers, as well as provide trauma-informed material for transportation services professional training. A YMCA director will be responsible for training before and after school staff about the prevalence of trauma and its important impact on students, and school-wide practices for creating trauma-sensitive environments. The YMCA member will collaborate with school staff, families, and YMCA staff to foster consistency across environments. Finally, a school board member will participate in staff development, representing support from the district on a larger scale. The district representative will also provide insight as to district policy and supports. Ensuring that all staff understand the prevalence of trauma and how it affects the brain and development will be an essential first step to creating a trauma-sensitive school. Understanding how relationships and adaptive coping skills support resilience will be equally important. Professional development will focus on both in order to set the stage for viewing our building's policies and procedures through a trauma-sensitive lens. With this lens in place, staff will receive new training on PBIS, which better explains the rationale behind PBIS and clarifies the appropriate employment of tiered strategies. While our school has eliminated most traditional policies and protocols in an effort to meet students' needs, our approach to behavior and social-emotional learning continues to fall back on punitive or reactionary methods. PBS, which our district adopted many years ago, is a school-wide framework for preventing, reducing, and replacing problem behaviors. Due to a lack of understanding, we have not effectively or appropriately employed this approach to creating a positive and supportive environment. Using the PBIS framework, we will refine and solidify Tier 1 and Tier 2 intervention strategies and revamp strategies or Tier 3 strategies completely to ensure that our policies and protocols are written and carried out with trauma sensitivity. In regard to academic and non-academic strategies, staff will use strategies learned in professional development to get to know students on a personal level and to build and nurture caring relationships with all students. By learning more about students on a personal level, staff will be able or begin to identify strengths and interests which will be emphasized and used to bridge deficits. In addition, getting to know students and their strengths will allow staff to identify student leaders who will mentor other students and provide student voice. Providing leadership opportunities for students empowers students to take ownership and improve self-esteem and self-worth, which is directly related to how students behave. Finally, we will use PBIS Tier 1 and Tier 2 framework for teaching and reteaching predictable routines and expectations. We will use second step curriculum to teach students to recognize and identify their emotions and the emotions of others, and to use self-regulation strategies, as well as to engage and interact positively with others. Identifying and effectively coordinating with mental health and other services outside of school is critical. We have already begun to develop some partnerships with community child care, dental, and health service agencies in order to facilitate access to some services. Coordinating mental health services has been more of a challenge because our state is ranked among the lowest in terms of lacking adequate mental health care providers, facilities, and funding to support the state's population. While there are limited mental health resources available in our area, our change team will research the services that are available and collaborate with them to support students and families in accessing the services that they need. Family collaboration is the final element of creating a trauma-sensitive school. In addition to including one or more parents on our leadership change team, we will involve families by soliciting and using their input to inform our decisions related to creating a trauma-sensitive school. Culture and climate surveys will be sent out to families to obtain baseline feedback about how welcome and safe they feel at school and to solicit recommendations for creating a more welcoming environment. Recommendations will be reviewed and an action plan for improvement will be drafted by interested staff, students, and families during our first community dinner. Culture and climate surveys will be resent out to families periodically in order to monitor progress towards our goal. In addition, to foster strong relationships with families, staff will formally meet with individual families at the beginning, middle, and end of each school year to engage in goal setting, progress monitoring, share information, and to ensure families' needs are being met at school. These conferences will convey that we are all on the same team working towards the same goal. Finally, families will be invited to attend Take Your Family to School days, professional development about trauma, and events that foster a sense of community and belonging. An open door policy will also support the collaboration between families and school, which is essential to creating a trauma-sensitive school. We may not be able to do anything about the trauma our kids experience, but we can do a lot to provide a trauma-sensitive learning environment for all students.